And now to Robin, the best man. To Robin!
Thank you, David. I suppose it's the Horne's connection with motor vehicles. We've already heard a little bit about this evening, so we should be grateful you're actually here. I gather you broke down on the somewhere in the UK yesterday and you got here. So, Slough. Oh, I thought it was closer, but well done for you. I don't know if anybody needs to go to the loo here. I'm actually busting to go to the loo, but I didn't realise I was number 6 in a quite a lengthy set of speeches. And all have been hugely enjoyable and showering praise on Nick and Kate, which is excellent. And in fact, it reminds. I wasn't going to mention these, so I'm now mindful that I need to speed things up a bit. But it reminds me of I got a text this morning from your good self, Nick, who is right there. And it says, this was this morning. I received this when I was waking up in bed this morning, and it said, Horne's just phoned me, that referring to Nick, and asked me to tell you that the 15-minute speech limit no longer applies. You can take as long as you like, and no story is too heinous. I thought I should pass that on. Okay, Nick, well thanks for that. I mean, to be honest, I'm reasonably committed to what I've got, but with the aforementioned 36 speakers, some of these stories might have been repeated, but amazingly, they haven't. I was a little bit wary about the sort of references that Nico and Nick were making to the Breakback Mountain type of experiences that you two have enjoyed together. But I think that will be something that we'll have to investigate at a later time. But most of them seem to be not covered on my speech. Anyway, my thoughts are that if anybody wants to go to the loo, I reckon this is broadly 20 minutes. If anybody wants to go to the loo, please do so. I'm sure there are people there crossing the legs. I will not be offended if you need to go. There we go, go. Honestly, I'm surprised there are only 2. You're not going to miss much because there's plenty of stuff in here, and I'm sure there we go, there's another one, off we go. Honestly, please feel free to do so because I know it's a long evening. Anyway, shall I get back to what's written on a piece of paper? Well, I suppose it was a great honour to be asked by Nick to look after his best interests. I'm not sure I have. I mean, Nick and Kate together seem to have arranged previous speakers to make sure they're showered in glory. And I think they've achieved that pretty well. So, I'm going to have to ad-lib and amend a little bit as I go along to reverse that, because I suppose my job, I can't follow on that trade. But anyway, it's absolutely fantastic, and I genuinely, what a wonderful occasion it goes without saying, both of them are the most generous, fantastic friends and individuals that any of us have met. And I don't want to labour that point. We all know it. And it's wonderful that you two are both married today. So I'll leave it at that for the time being, but congratulations. However, I suppose, I'm only on line 2 here. It falls to me to have a little chat now about what it is that is apparently so wonderful about Nick that has forged the path to us all being here today. And my word, have we just heard how far people have travelled here to be today, both on the sake of Kate and Nick. It's absolutely remarkable. So as you already heard, Nick and I, along with several other people in the room, we're all at Durham University together, and we're obviously close chums, that's quite clear. And those relationships have grown over the years. But Nick's group of friends spans well beyond the walls of Durham Castle. Our university college in Durham was a little bit bigger than this, a little bit better, not much, but roughly along these lines. And that was where we grew up for 3 years. But with his wide variety of jobs, the locations he's worked in, and his warm and enthusiastic nature, Nick makes friends wherever he goes. I think, well, I'm not a great Facebooker, but when I heard that Nick announced on Facebook that he was getting married, there were unprecedented levels of I want to be your friend, or like, or I mean, I probably got it wrong, like some friends. What's the phrase? 1,000, was it? 1,000. I mean, presumably the little geeks in Seattle or wherever it is that's Facebook was wondering, who is this dude that's just announced he's getting married? And it is the one and only Horne. I mean, it was quite remarkable. And that shows the rest of us how popular these two are. And quite frankly, the rest of us are Billy No-Mates. And I'm happy being Billy No-Mates as long as Nick and Kate keep their clan together. So it's fabulous to see so many of you here today, and also on the stag weekend, of course. A lot of Nick's chums from his various endeavours during life we hadn't met before. So we had 29 of us in Berlin. I mean, again, an unprecedented stag weekend, fantastic time. It was lovely to see. So on that note, in terms of mates, I've received news from Simon and Sabine Figures in Singapore and Dan Rivers in Brazil with their regrets of being unable to attend. But they wish you both all the best today.
He's a spy.
Now, as I'm reading this, I've realised I've already been speaking to Dan Rivers today at length. And in fact, he's over there. There he is, waving. Which goes to show that the fluid nature of the life we live these days. 1 minute Dan's in Brazil wishing that England will lose the football in order that it'll get back to for the wedding. And indeed, you've obviously got some powers, Dan. Anyway, now that you're back, you can tell Nick yourself how pleased you are that he's married. So as many of you will know, Nick, and we've heard already, Nick's got a voracious appetite for adventure. He's flown a light aircraft through the Grand Canyon. In fact, until recently, he and Andy and a couple of other guys here have owned their own light aircraft where they've been on various adventures. Indeed, Nick even flew to his own stag weekend in Berlin. Not many people have managed to do that. That's fantastic. He's climbed high mountains. He's dived and sailed the oceans. He's skied or hiked large swathes of the Alps. In fact, I can't even have time to include the story, but there's a new mountain in Austria called Mount Horne that was named after an incident in which Nick nearly perished, obviously along with a couple of others at the time. What else has he done here? Sorry, you'll have to forgive me slightly because I had a couple of bottles of wine prior to standing up because I didn't realise how long it would be before I got here. So he's abseiled as well, treacherous cliff faces, including Durham Castle, and he's an accomplished skydiver. And in his spare time, he was a Royal Marines soldier. So where on earth is he going to stop? I've actually heard theories that Nick could actually well be a secret agent. Not unlike James Bond.
Figures.
Others, I suspect, are probably more likened to Johnny English, but that's there for debate. I think the only adventurous sport I haven't seen Nick involved with is horse riding, which, quite frankly, for the well-being of the horse and the safety of anyone nearby, is just as well. So remarkably, Nick has also found time to hold down a range of interesting and challenging jobs. Nick should have graduated probably from Durham with a 2-1, or perhaps even a first in engineering. However, as the JCR secretary in his final year, he was somewhat preoccupied as editor-in-chief and publisher of the weekly Castle Bogsheet. This illustrious publication was a newspaper with gossip columns, compromising photographs, and general humour that got pinned to the back of every loo door in the college. Nick was extremely good at this, and we would all look forward to our Monday morning ablutions so we could keep track on what was happening in the world. This is undoubtedly one of Nick's best achievements at Durham. But anyway, we had to leave, So Nick left his journalism back in Durham and decided that he wanted to follow his father Alan's footsteps into telecoms engineering. So he rapidly, according to Alan this evening, I've been sitting there, rapidly established himself as a hard-working and very competent engineer involved with several new mobile phone contracts around the world. But for one reason or another, this profession didn't tick all his boxes, and he was struggling to suppress the urge to be involved with international development and relations. We've heard it already this evening, but there's a fine line in life between boldness and recklessness. And it's fair to say Nick has successfully developed a method of regularly crossing the line and returning unscathed, which doesn't necessarily apply to everybody that travels alongside him. So while working for his father in Jordan, just as the Second Gulf War was ending, Nick decided to hand in his notice with Alan. And as you do, took a taxi from Amman to Baghdad, effectively adding himself to the list of displaced people in Iraq. So to cut a long story short, Nick spent a month or so working in a refugee camp before amazingly being appointed as the interim Minister of Energy for the newly forming Iraq government. This involved advising senior American and British generals and politicians about the infrastructure present requirements of Iraq and their future development needs. His experience as the Castle Bogsheet editor will no doubt have held him in great stead for this important international task. I can't help but think that the present chaos in Iraq can somehow be attributed to policy decisions of an interim energy minister some years back. So while in Iraq, Nick was lucky enough to experience some things money just can't buy. For example, has anybody in this room ever been hosed down by a large male urinating lion? Anybody? 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 Nick? Nick has. On one of his ministerial taskings, he was surveying Uday Hussein's palace, and he was a majestic beast. I suppose that refers not to Uday, but the lion. And so Nick enjoyed admiring him from a safe distance. When he accidentally dropped his glasses on one occasion, he bent down to pick them up, and he sensed that he was being quite heavily doused with hot water. A quick glance back at the lion found that it was on its hind legs in its cage, giving Nick a good hose down from several yards away. I mean, if none of us have experienced that, what else can go on the list? So on another occasion, Nick was staying in one of the secure hotels, apparently, in the green zone. There was some small arms fire, as there is, during the night, and there were a couple of rockets hitting the hotel. Luckily, no one was injured in the attack. But the following morning, out of the 200 or so cars parked in the car park, only one of them was totally destroyed. Can anybody hazard a guess at whose car that belonged to? Nick has a habit of attracting that type of attention. Anyway, since his baptism of fire in Iraq, Nick has enjoyed working for the United Nations and other international agencies that we've heard about this evening. Mainly, he's responsible for bringing peace and stability to countries such as Afghanistan and South Sudan. So we're probably all agreed there's more work to be done. But Nick has shifted attention somewhat and is presently working for the British government in Nigeria, advising the Nigerians on future road infrastructure requirements. So I think basically let's wait and see what happens to Nigeria in 10 years from now. See how successful he is. In fact, it was on one of these international postings that Nick was lucky enough to meet a lovely, beautiful Kate McGowan. Right, so I've been talking to Kate McGowan. And Kate at the time was the BBC correspondent in the Philippines. And as Andrew said earlier on, the rest is history. But it's clear to all of us that both Kate and Nick share a huge interest in the travel and all the international issues. And I'm sure they'll remain tremendous ambassadors for all us Brits, wherever they go. But as iterated earlier on, if it so happens that you're in London, or maybe even Winchester, for a couple of years, that would be fantastic as well. So don't feel the urge. So we've touched a little bit on Nick's impressive career accomplishments, but we haven't really looked at any of life's little hiccups that he's had along the way. I suppose that's where I come in a little bit. That's potentially a War and Peace manuscript, so I obviously have to edit it down. Nonetheless, of course, I have to reveal the truth, if only part of it. So as I started jotting down the various incidents that have caused us so much humour, abject fear, or exasperation over the years, it was beginning to look like a Chinese takeaway menu. There were at least 60 options I could talk about this evening, some of which even had an A and a B version. I can't do them all, so I've had to limit it to the daily specials board. The important thing is some of these incidents are on the public record, and we must all try and learn from them, particularly you, Kate. Forewarned is forearmed, as they say. Anyway, obviously I didn't know Nick when he was younger, but I'm reliably informed that his appetite for adventure started at a young age. Once upon a time, David was sitting in a rubber dinghy, securely fastened to the jetty, which was essential at the time because the current and tide was running very strongly. Nick decided to give David some adventurous training by untying the painter, allowing the boat to be swept out to sea. A horrified Alan Horne, here on my left, had to commandeer some poor local's boat with an outboard motor and go out and effect a rescue, which did actually happen, but not, sadly, without the poor local boat capsizing and the outboard motor going underwater. I'm told Nick had front view seats on the jetty, all watching this whole spectacle unravel for his personal entertainment. Next thing I want to talk about is Nick's introduction to adrenaline sports and his first parachute jump at an airfield near Durham. The airfield was vast, as they tend to be, with a long flat runway running down the middle and a small clubhouse tucked neatly on the southern edge, but basically no other obstructions. Other, of course, than one solitary tree growing on the northern end of the airfield. Of all the places on the airfield, do I need to tell you where Nick Horne landed? Straight in the middle of this one and only tree. I was there at the time. It took us a good hour or so to get poor Nick out of this tree, and somebody to sadly repair the parachute. Still on the parachuting theme, there is the occurrence of the near-fatal air crash at Thruxton Airfield in Hampshire. Following on from his parachuting experiences in Durham, Nick was doing some more parachute training at a military centre in Wiltshire. On one occasion, he was particularly stressed because he couldn't find his phone and was convinced it had been stolen. A thorough search ensued and the place was turned upside down, but sadly nothing was found. Later that day, he was a passenger in the front seat of one of the parachute aircraft, practicing his co-pilot drills. On final approach, there were gusty crosswinds, and the pilot realised to his horror that the aircraft rudder controls were suddenly jammed, making it nigh impossible to land straight, let alone on the actual runway. There was some sort of heavy landing, not quite a crash, but nearly, heavy landing, and subsequent inspection revealed that the jammed controls were caused by Nick's mobile phone wedged out of sight between the co-pilot's rudder pedals. So if you ever find yourself in the front seat of an aeroplane with Nick, just make sure he's got his mobile phone well out of the way. There's one other skydiving and flying menu I'd like to cover, which took place apparently in Arizona. Nick and one other were on a route to Joe Martin's wedding, Joe sitting down there, in New Zealand. And they'd stopped for a few days hour building in a light aircraft.
Nick had only recently got his private pilot's license, and this was very shortly after 9/11. So air security was all very tight in the States. So he was qualified, but certainly not experienced. So while flying Nick's small Cessna towards Tucson, Arizona, it was along the edge of a zone known as Area 51. Apparently they looked for UFOs and things. Nick and one other saw a deserted airstrip with nothing else, literally for as far as the eye could see. Naturally, they thought this was a fantastic place to conduct a highly illegal and unauthorized skydive from their own aircraft. A quick risk assessment of the terrain, the chances of being caught, was conducted and scored high marks, confirming it was a very good idea. So Nick adjusted his course and landed the aircraft and immediately got on with the modifications, which involved removing the pilot's door and hiding it in a nearby bush. Whoever was going to do the jump would then clamber over the pilot's shoulders in flight and drop out of the new large hole in the side. Straws were drawn as to who would fly and who would jump. And it turned out on this occasion that Nick would be the pilot of this aged aircraft with no door and only a moth-eaten seatbelt to keep him in place, having only just passed his pilot's license. Adrenaline was running high, but the team got airborne, thus far undetected, and climbed 10,000 feet over the airfield, whereupon the parachutists did as planned by clambering over Nick's head and shoulders while he was attempting to fly the aeroplane and dropping out of the side of the aircraft. Amazingly, there was no incident so far, which, if anything to involve Nick, is quite remarkable. However, sadly for anyone concerned, it appears that Area 51 is very, very well covered by radar. As Nick was descending, vehicle dust clouds could be seen rapidly approaching the airfield, and it was literally a race for the ground to pick up the parachutists and get out of there. Hide the door, or keep the door hidden, and basically make a quick getaway, come back and pick the door up another time. So Nick was bombing down, vehicles bombing towards the airfield, etc., and basically arrived at the same time. Nick about 1 minute before what turned out to be 2 US Army Humvees and a police car. The opportunity for the quick getaway was clearly not there. So Nick had some very quick thinking to do. He had cleverly parked the aircraft with the missing door side facing away and rushed round to meet the authorities on the good side. He fluently delivered an excuse that there was a loud bang in flight and he thought that he hit a bird. So decided to make a perfectly legitimate precautionary landing to inspect the aircraft, as indeed any professional pilot would do. This was an inspired excuse until the overly helpful soldiers and police wanted to help him inspect the aircraft. Of course, this was totally out of the question, because he would then have to develop the excuse to describe how he didn't realise that the bird strike had actually knocked the door off the aircraft and a fellow passenger had fallen out. The story develops, but I will leave you with the knowledge that Nick won't be tempted to pull that type of trick a second time. You're clear to go to the loo, by the way, if anybody wants to go. So, where have we got to? There are some other sporting events that Nick's judgment has later been called into question. Perhaps put your hand up in here in the room if you've ever been abseiling with Nick and entrusted him with setting up the ropes for your safe descent. Anybody in the room? Who's that? Sorry, who's that? Is that you, Talos? It might be Talos down the end. Oh dear. So I have heard about this Talos. So this must be the occasion where you did a midnight abseil down the side of Durham Castle, only to, Nick had set up all the ropes for you, only to find when you got to the bottom of the rope that it was 20 feet too short. So poor old Mike had to release himself from the end of the rope and drop 20 feet into a nettle bed. After which Nick reassessed the rope requirements and made a safe descent himself. So lesson to all of you, particularly you, Kate, if you ever go abseiling with Nick, make sure he goes first. Skiing. Perhaps put your hand up if anybody ever has been here skiing with the knowledge that Nick is on the same run as you. Anybody? There are a few of us. There's quite a few people that have been on the same run. This is quite obviously a dangerous experience. Nick's spatial awareness is fantastic, directly to his front, and a couple of degrees either side. But anything left or right of that, he has no idea whatsoever what is happening around him. And there are several people in this room, no doubt, who have suffered the ill consequence of that. So Kate, my only advice to you, having been skiing, Sarah and I having been skiing with you guys earlier in the year, for future years, remain up the hill and behind Nick at all times, and you'll remain happily married. So Nick enjoys a life on the ocean wave, but as with all of us, even the robust Nick Horne can suffer a little bit of seasickness. He would never show it, of course, though, until it was fractionally too late. There's another Nick in the room. Here he is, in a Union Jack. He was once helming quite a large yacht in the Mediterranean in very strong winds, and there were a few lads in the room who were also on the boat. Nick here was on the top sides, well upwind. To use a military phrase, none of us will ever forget Nick's deployment of the area weapon straight into the cockpit, right as we were all needing to keep the boat upright in these strong winds. Nick here, the helmsman, was a little bit surprised that apparently it wasn't actually Nick's fault here, it was the fault of the boat. So apparently no apology was necessary. The rest of us wiping it away. So moving on to transport, we've covered a little bit of that already actually this evening, transport, I think, so you've probably got a fair theme of that. Kate, I would recommend to you, if I were you, when it comes to the decision for the family car, just don't buy an expensive one, quite frankly. It's bound to end in tears. I don't know if there's anybody else in here. I mean, put your hand up if you have. Has anybody lent a car to Nick here, only to receive a phone call shortly after that says the engine is exploded and the car will no longer drive? Oh, two. I'm amazed it's only you. I mean, it's definitely me. You've had one as well. There must be more, surely. Surely Nick has written off more cars than ours. My beloved Peugeot, that was the end. So beware. In fact, only last year, Nick was driving down to an airfield in Wiltshire in his very smart Saab when I got another phone call. It was early on a Sunday morning, asking if I had a tow rope. Naturally, I was quite intrigued and agreed to drive to the rescue. I was a little bit surprised when I got the directions to follow a small, windy lane that crosses the River Avon at a ford. Nick had been following the GPS shortest route to destination, but sadly, TomTom hadn't caught the fact that there was an oceanic crossing somewhere on that route. Nick, however, got there and conducted another one of his famous risk assessments and determined that it was perfectly possible. Simon Figgers, who was with him, was less sure, so decided to film the crossing on his iPhone. The last quote we have from Nick before setting off was, "Don't worry, Simon, I've done loads of off-road driving, this will be a piece of cake." We then cut to a bow wave rising over the bonnet of the Saab, which practically then floats off downstream, followed by the inevitable cough cough, splutter splutter, and then silence, and some rather feeble pleas from help from the driver's side electric window that no longer opened. Quite how Nick thought I was going to rescue him with a golf, I don't know. But luckily, knowing the local farmer, I was able to get a tractor positioned, and we towed Nick and his car to the final resting place later on that morning. There are several more. I'm mindful of the time, but you've got the general message there. So I will call it a day at this point. You've got the sense that we've all had fantastic holidays, journeys and experiences with Nick, and will no doubt do so together with Nick and Kate together, given the amount they share the same interests. My recommendation to all of us is to keep that wary eye on a phrase that we've now known to be called the act of Horne. And indeed, Andy Givron arrived today, set off from London today, and his journey was interrupted somewhat by act of Horne today. I won't labour the point, but the point is, you never know where it's going to arrive. So just be aware, particularly UK. The fact that Nick is more often than not right in the thick of things, both with friends and at work, is a testament to the fantastic chap that he is. He's hugely generous with all that he does. He is hugely generous with all that he does. And we have absolutely no doubt that Kate and Nick will make fantastic husband and wife to each other reciprocally, and look forward to doing so. But more importantly, continue as great friends to us, sons and daughters, retrospectively, to the rest of us in this room. So there's been a few toasts this evening to Nick and Kate. Generally, it seems to be the best man's job to toast the bride and the groom. And I will go ahead and do this. But in this case, they have so many friends, which is clear to all of us, sadly some of whom are not here today. So may I suggest that when we stand, we toast Nick and Kate and absent friends.
He's a nice guy, he's a good guy, and he's very lucky to have Kate.
Nick, congratulations. That was a comprehensive set of speeches, flattering, damning, and very funny.
Nick, Kate, congratulations. You both look lovely today, and I wish you all the very best for your future life together. She loves any such thing.
She loves a bit of attention.
Any attention, she'll laugh at. And also, she doesn't really know how to bark. I don't think she very rarely barks.
Yeah, happy days, brilliant. He's I think he's really relaxed. He slept on a single bed. He was going to have an option of sleeping in a bunk bed with my granddad in '91, but granddad farted too much, and that was it.